journalists, it's really a world that's very different. We live in a world of news and having to hold back your personal self to report the story. Often you're in a dangerous or concerning or worrying, anxiety producing situation, trying to get information, trying to meet a deadline. And one of the amazing things I found with Stormbeat is it really is a record of that kind of record keeping. You share stories of where you were in your life at the time and how the experience of reporting or doing a feature story or covering an accident scene impacted you as a human being too.
Right. And, honestly, as I was doing this, I mean, I did know from the very beginning there was a book in a speed if I could find the way to pull it out. But it's only now when this is happening and I'm talking about it and I'm hearing people's reaction that I realize, at the risk of being, I don't mean to be boastful, but it's kind of amazing the records I have for a period of probably 15 years of just either reporters' notebooks, notes on my computer, my journals. There's a lot documented there. And I swear to you, I probably have every reporter's notebook ever, with the exception of maybe, I bet you I'm not missing a half a dozen in 15 years. I don't know what that says about me. Probably not that I want to know, but.
I'll ask you to read some in a moment, but I'm curious about if that's where you started with the book. When you decided to create Stormbeat, did you start with all of that, that historical paperwork that you saved over the years?
Well, so I knew at some point, I knew that this was what I was going to attempt to do. When I got laid off and was licking my wounds, and that's what I was doing, I sat down for a year and I went through all my journals. I labeled them, I did these years and I numbered them and I went through all of those. And I went through all my stories in the Oregonian Library and I went through all my notes and I just started making a list of the stories I thought deserved to be in the book. And to meet that they had to have something more than just what was in the Oregonian. There had to be something I could tell the reader they didn't know, either how you go about getting a story, the impact on me, what was happening to me personally, things that happen behind the scenes that people may not be aware of happen. So that was what I sat down with. And then I just went through, I sat down with yellow legal pads and wrote, this is where this is and this is where that is. And I got out all the reporters' notebooks. I have a whole Rubbermaid container of them. So I had all the documentation of all my own notes, both longhand and on the computer, my journals, the stories. And that did make it didn't make it easy. That's a lot to plow through, but it did give me this huge amount of detail that I would have never remembered, and allowed me to just kind of have everything at my fingertips here in my house. And like I said, it took me a year to go through that before I even started writing.
Wow. How about you read us a little bit now?
Okay. Well, let me have a sip of my iced tea and put on my readers, which I have to note are not cool like Laura's readers, but I'm getting to be an old broad and I don't have to be cool anymore. Okay. I had come to the coast by way of Pennsylvania, Alaska, Connecticut, Seattle, Southern Oregon, and finally Colorado, where I had a Sunday column and wrote features for the Rocky Mountain News. My husband, Chan, was a power lineman, and so we followed the big construction line jobs. Tramping, they call it. People felt bad for me moving all the time. I thought I was lucky. Every new town was a fresh adventure, even the grocery store. I wasn't sure I would ever stay in one place, but if we did settle down, we always said it would be on the Oregon coast. That was our mantra. In 2000, just as the Rocky Mountain News entered into a joint operating agreement with the Denver Post that cast the Rocky as the loser, just as I hit a milestone year, 40, just as the one-year anniversary of the Columbine High School massacre came and went, I saw a help wanted ad for a lineman at a Central Coast utility and fired off my husband's resume. That was on a Monday. 1 week later, he interviewed with the Central Lincoln People's Utility District by phone. We flew to Portland Thursday and drove to the coast, where I wrote my Sunday column for the Rocky from a third-story hotel room overlooking the beach. It was foggy and gray, and I thought it was beautiful and romantic and somehow a bit poignant. That night, we slept with the hotel room deck door open, electric cadet heater blazing, so we could better hear the surf. I knew there was a good chance we would move here, and the idea both thrilled and saddened me. In Denver, I was invited to restaurant openings, box seats at pro sports games, elite private parties, and social events. I was not the small town Pennsylvania daughter of a truck driver and waitress, neither of whom had graduated from high school. I was Lori Tobias with the Rocky Mountain News, first and second place winner that year for features and magazine writing from the Colorado Society of Journalists. Who would I be on the Oregon coast? I knew that answer all too well. I would be another struggling writer with the dream of publishing my novel, a dream with a slim, slim chance of coming true. On staff at a newspaper or magazine, my work would be published and read. On my own, there were no such guarantees. They offered Chan the job that afternoon. The Oregon coast. It was supposed to be our version of paradise. We bought a house with views of the ocean set against a backdrop of towering evergreens and a profusion of flowers that bloomed wild nearly year-round. A place where traffic jams were 2 rounds at the same red light and violent crime the exception. And I was miserable. I loved the beauty of the Oregon coast, but I couldn't quite get my hand around the idea that this was the end of the road. And I missed the Denver newsroom, missed the parties, the openings, the sun and snow, even the pro sports games. And I missed my friends. I moved from a city where the phone book filled 2 volumes, each as thick as a brick, to one where you could fit the entire directory in a space as slender as a reporter's pad. Voicemail was not an option, and a phone call 20 miles away was long distance. For shopping, there was Fred Meyer, Walmart, and for a time, a small J.C. Penney's housed in a dull gray block of a building adjoining an auto parts store. Alone at my desk, facing the blank screen that was to be my novel, I found myself longing for a column like I'd had at the Rocky, this one to be centered on the Oregon coast. I wrote the editor at the Oregonian to plead my case. I told him how the coast was growing. I suggested stories that I, living in the heart of the coast, Yaquina Bay on one side of town, the Pacific on the other, was uniquely positioned to write. But the newspaper was cutting positions, not adding. And while I still held out hope in a Pollyannish sort of way that the news business would rebound, the grim decline had been the story of my career, and it was getting harder and harder to foresee a bright future in the world of paper and ink. So I eked out a living freelancing, something I've done most of my career. I landed a gig stringing for the New York Times. My first story was about Christian Longo, who murdered his wife and 3 children and threw their bodies in the Yaquina and Elsie Bays. It was only after I filed the story that I learned I would receive no byline. Weeks later, they sent in a correspondent for a more extensive story. He called with instructions on what I was to gather for him. When I balked, he noted I would be paid for my time, of course. It did not escape my attention that overnight I had gone from being a columnist and features writer at one of the largest metro papers in the country to Girl Friday. Mostly I wrote magazine features and travel stories. I flew to Switzerland, Australia, Alaska, the Channel Islands of Jersey and Guernsey, usually first or business class, always staying in the best hotels, dining at the finest restaurants. It made for some memorable moments and exposed me to experiences I talk about to this day, good and bad. A couple of years after my first note to the editor at the Oregonian, I wrote again. Within an hour of hitting send, I found his reply. I'd just been reading your story in Portland Monthly and wondering if you'd be interested in writing news for the Oregonian. Actually, I wasn't. Not news. News as I recalled it from my early years as a general assignment reporter and then Capitol Bureau Chief for a small Eastern Connecticut daily, meant long hours in mind-numbing meetings, daily monitoring of police reports, long drawn-out courthouse hearings, and covering topics of which I had little interest or worse knowledge. It also meant working long hours for which there would be no overtime pay, a pattern I saw repeatedly in the business. I got the job offer on St. Patrick's Day. My first story would be about a model shipbuilder in North Bend, about 60 miles of the area we agreed I'd cover. It was an apt beginning. In short time, I'd be covering all 360 miles of the Oregon coast. Despite my early misgivings, I came quickly to believe that I had been blessed with the best writing gig on earth, albeit a dark one. I was always racing somewhere, and it was rarely for anything good. Often it involved death, car crashes, falls, murders, suicide, murder and suicide, drownings, capsizings. There were a lot of capsizings. I don't think I'll ever be able to look out over that winter ocean, see the city of lights that is the crab fleet, and not worry, not feel that squeeze in my gut and wonder not if, but when. Working on the Oregon coast made me a better writer and a better person, but it also made me wary, tentative, watchful. I don't run on the beach without knowing the tide. I don't ever step beyond the signs that warn not to. I don't even get close. And the sound of a sharp bang is never just a backfire, but a potential murder, suicide, or both. I'm sure I've always had some of that wariness in me, but covering the Oregon coast amplified it many times over. Nonetheless, if many of the miles along Highway 101 are defined for me by someone else's tragedy, so too are they reminders that I am blessed with having the privilege of working in the most amazing setting, a place where life is authentic and the landscape so stunningly beautiful all these years later, it can still take my breath away.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you.
Before we get any farther, I'd love to give a shout out to OSU Press, your publisher, and ask you about working with them. I think it's obviously a wonderful place for your book to land because of its historical context and hearing the story behind the story, like I said. So
OSU was exactly where I needed to land. They have been wonderful to me. It's been a great experience. I couldn't have asked for a better experience. And I really believe that was where this book needed to be. So hugely grateful.
I feel that way too. It was such a good book, a good match for you, and I hope for them, I'm sure for them too. So, and Marty and Tom are here. So thanks for being here from OSU Press. So I was thinking, when I was looking at your cover, I thought about loneliness and isolation and how all of us have been really lonely and isolated during the pandemic. It's just been a conversation in society in a way that we've had pockets of that conversation maybe with friends, but it seems like everybody's been talking about isolation. And for me, there was nothing more isolating than being managing editor of a newspaper on the Oregon coast, where I couldn't even go to the grocery store without someone complaining to me. I couldn't walk on the beach without someone coming up and stopping me. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your sense of isolation and whether or not loneliness has been attached to that for you or not.
Well, I kind of feel like I shouldn't even say this. I do good alone. I don't know why, but I'm happy alone. I do have a husband, and I grew up in diners. My mother managed diners. I was always around people. So it's really counterintuitive. And yet I'm perfectly content alone. Having said that, there was a point where I really had to make a conscious effort to kind of withdraw from the community here because I couldn't do anything. I went to a birthday party and this woman came up to me. I had written a story about Nye Beach. Everybody loves Nye Beach. Well, at one point, Nye Beach was a little sketchy. And this woman said to me in the story, I quoted in the story, that Nye Beach had not always felt safe to be alone at night. And this woman comes up to me, why did you let her say that? It's like, I try to explain to him, well, she gets to say what she wants to say. Even if you didn't agree that that's what Nye Beach felt like, she does get to have her opinion, but you can't. And then I would be, in line at some event or getting a glass of wine. Why didn't you cover my event? Or, hey, come over here to the side. I want you to cover this event. And it was just like, people leave me alone. And the real blinker was we were out with some friends and went to, a dinner thing where there's some wine and they're like, hey, let's go have a real drink together. And so I'm okay. And so we go into this bar, which was a dive. And the only wine they had was, and I'm not a wine snob, believe me, I can't afford to be a wine snob, but there's a limit. You know what, just give me, can I get like a vodka on the rocks? Because at least if you're gonna pollute yourself with something decent. So I was happy. It wasn't trash, but I was happy. And so I come walking out of this bar and I swear to God, this woman comes running up to me. Are you Lori Tobias? I was like, oh my God, please. So there came this point though, really, where I didn't go out. I just kind of withdrew. I just seemed like the easier way to do it.
I did the same thing. I found whenever I was out in the world with people, I felt extremely vulnerable. And I just checked to see who is here. And my former publisher is not here. So I can tell you that I walked into a political scandal when I joined the NewsGuard. And I didn't know that until I signed on and showed up for my first day of work. And I was all perky because surprise, it's me. And I had braces, so I looked like I was 12. And the town was mad at the paper owners, the publisher and his wife, and they hadn't prepared me. And there was actually like a sign campaign on downtown Lincoln City about supporting the former editor, and everybody wanted me to go home. So
I think I had to cover part of the story, but
I bet you did. Yeah, for 2 years, I was the outsider, and I understand that as a small town. But I also made changes because I had worked really hard in newspapers, and I wanted everybody to have space in the paper, not just the people who were friends with the editor, because that's how it used to be. So it was just very different. But I always had those experiences in the grocery store or the library or just walking on the beach, and people would come up to me and, or a story idea. And, I have to say that for as scarring as that experience was, people love their local papers. And I have to say there is now, looking back, a sense of appreciation for how deeply it mattered what we were doing. You must have felt that too with the Oregonian when you got feedback from your stories or from people around town as your stories came out.
Well, my experience was a little different from yours. On one hand, I found that you called somebody and said, "This is Lori with the Oregonian." They paid attention. They called you back, as opposed to calling and saying, "This is Lori with, I don't know, West, whatever." And 3 days later, they're like, "Yeah, okay, whatever." People responded. That was good as a reporter to get who just get back to you immediately. It was wonderful. But and there were a lot of people who were really happy I was here covering the coast. But there was also this thing where I was an outsider. But you got to remember, I covered the entire coast from stem to stern, and I met, people were just. I wasn't just a journalist, and I wasn't just an outsider. It was an outsider journalist, and some of them had very strong feelings about the Oregonian. It was kind of like, "What are you doing here? Just get out. We don't want you here." So there was always kind of when I had to walk up and introduce myself to somebody, particularly in another town, I was never sure what I was going to get. Interestingly enough, there are people, so I've been here 20 years. There are people I will encounter to this day who live in Lincoln County who have no idea that I live in Newport. And I can think of one elected official who I spoke to. He was a law official, law authority, whatever. I spoke to him all the time for maybe 5-6 years, not all the time, but whenever there was a news story, I'd call. It was the sheriff. I'd call him. And then one day I ran into him in the grocery store, I think in Corvallis. And he had no idea I lived in Newport. It's like, okay. So, yeah.
And I'm curious about, as your background as a journalist, you've also written these long form literary works. You've written a novel called Wander, set in Alaska, and now Stormbeat, your nonfiction, your memoir. And I'm curious about how you think reporting has impacted your style. Both are pretty slim books. It feels like you can really pack a punch and get a lot of information into a small space.
I think, again, I can look at that two ways. When I went into writing, so I came from Rocky, where I wrote features and I had a column, and the Rocky was pretty liberal about letting you find your own style, letting you experiment, have fun with things. And then I come to the Oregonian, and it's news. It's nut grass, and it's news, and it's, in fact, somebody just told me something the other day about one of my former editors was like, used to bitch about me because why can't she ever write a straight lead? Because I would always be like Little Miss Features. So on one hand, being at the Oregonian made me a much better reporter. I didn't have a choice. I have to say I have nothing but the utmost respect for their standards in terms of, you don't get away with anything. You fact check everything. You cross your I's and you dot your I's and cross your T's. And having said that, my strength, or what I've always responded to in other writers, is voice. For some reason, that's my thing, voice. And I felt kind of floundered for a long time at the Oregonian because without that voice, without being able to put myself in the story, I kind of was lost. Eventually I figured it out, but that wasn't my strong point. And I think it hurt me as a fiction writer or as a features writer in that it tamped down that voice. I felt like I had to withdraw it. And, voice is also character and personality, and it's what the narrator really brings to the page and takes the reader by the hand and says, this is how it's going to be. Come with me. And as a reader, that's what I love. So I think I lost a little bit of that. I don't think it's lost forever, but I think I have to work to find it again, maybe, or maybe I've already found it, but it wasn't as natural as it had once been.
Dialogue, on the other hand, I feel I mean, at least from reading both books, I feel like your dialogue, working as a reporter and getting people's quotes down, and you've always done it, almost always done it longhand on a reporter's notebook, not recording. So you get a sense of the cadence of voices. And I feel like your dialogue has always been super authentic.
Thank you. For some reason, I don't know why, people will talk to me. And I honestly don't know why, but I can get people to talk. Sometimes, you end up, I think as a reporter, you end up feeling like a therapist. And sometimes I was a little too empathetic. And maybe that's what made people want to talk to me, is I listened. I don't know. But I also studied fiction with Tom Jenks, who is the founder of narrativemagazine.org.com, I'm not sure which. And one thing he taught me about dialogue is it's a sword fight. So obviously in journalism, that's not the case. In journalism, you put down what they say, you write their quotes and you figure it out. But in fiction or features writing, he said, nobody just says, hi, how are you? It's a sword fight. And that's a real hard one, because obviously every conversation can't be a sword fight. But I think when you use that as a guide for writing dialogue in fiction, it makes you up your ante a little bit. You can't just say blah, blah, blah. And once you know that and you try to rise to that, it's good advice.
You've touched a little bit on covering traumatic events and people talking to you, and you had to go into some really uncomfortable, complicated situations and ask questions. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, or a particular incident that's in the book?
There's many, but one of my first years on this beat, there was a capsizing, and 2 men died and 1 man survived. And I went down to cover it, and knowing I've got to call the widows, and knowing I'm trying to get out of doing it, and just because I was new enough on the beat to think I could probably pull that off. Yeah, fat chance. And my editor called and she said, did you call the wife yet? I'm like, well, no. She goes, you have to make that call. And I'm like, yeah, okay. And so, yeah, but then you realize, I got a voicemail. I'm like, I didn't have to talk to him, except for then you realize it would be a better story if you did. And so there's this guilt of, I should be a better reporter. And as it turned out, the wife did call me back, and she was very gracious and kind and told me, what I needed to know. I've never relished making those phone calls. I always felt sort of intrusive, but I also knew that you had to. And what you learn is that sometimes people really do want to talk to you, because it's kind of their last chance to tell the world why this person mattered, why this person deserved to be loved, what they'll remember this person for, what other people should know about this person. More often than not, that is what you get on the other end. I can think of very few times where anybody was really rude or mean to me. I think the worst was, we're not taking calls right now. We don't want to talk right now. And you just have to respect that. And actually, I remember going into the funeral for a soldier and the stepmother kicking me out. And what are you going to do? It's a funeral. And my editor said to me, well, were they letting other news in? Were they letting other TV people in? Were they letting other broadcast? And I'm like, whoa. I don't know. But I'm still not going to go back there and push my way in, because they don't want me there. And as it turned out, the father of the soldier really wanted me there. And he had no idea why the stepmother, you just roll with it.
I was on the opposite end of those calls in April when my best friend Priya Khanna died of COVID. She was a doctor, and she was in a family of 5 doctors, and she and her father got COVID, and they died 8 days apart. And I ended up because I've been in journalism and I'm in publishing. A friend of a friend connected me with a Guardian reporter, and I ended up having to do an interview. And it was really hard, but I also appreciated being able to share. And then I was the person who helped the family talk to the reporter also. I encouraged them to go forward with the interview. And that was a really emotional experience. But I knew just what you said. I knew from having to write those pieces that without the family, you miss so much. And so I really encouraged and connected and texted and with a family and made sure that they would talk, and they did. And since then, there were other articles that came out and feature stories about the family. But I didn't get to write that story, right? That wasn't mine. That was the Guardian reporter's story. And she got a lot into their deaths and the crowded hospital conditions in New Jersey at the time, because that was newsworthy. And I respected that and honored that. But I think I wrote my zine about Priya, Sad House, because I had a voice as a loving person who loved Priya, but I wanted to tell more about who she was and then the long-term impact of the grief, and not just let the Guardian story be the last word, because yeah.
So let's trade hats for a second, Laura. Talk a little bit about Sad House and what it's about, and you talked a little bit about how it came to be, but tell people, what you got. I read the first 2 chapters and just was charmed by containment.
Thank you. It's a zine, and Annie Blooms has copies. I was on OPB talking about grief for the holidays, and Annie Blooms amazingly went to the publisher on the other side of the river here in Portland to pick up extra copies in advance of my OPB appearance, and then they sold out. But I think they have copies again now. Microcosm's a publisher, like I said. I just decided that everything was too big, too raw, just too much. And I really couldn't break down the experience of grieving for my best friend without writing. And I wasn't ready to have a long lens and look back at my friend, but I was able to sit there in the moment with the grief and think about grieving right now when we're all home, and how that impacted my kids. My 13-year-old stopped getting out of bed when my friend died, and I stopped getting out of bed. It was a couple-week vigil from when she got sick, went to the hospital, and then they had to intubate her, and she died on the ventilator. And my 13-year-old just wouldn't get out of bed and wouldn't eat. And I was like, oh wait, I better get out of bed and eat. And I'm really sad, but I don't want her to model after me. And then I had amazing conversations with her and my youngest about grief. And my youngest kept telling me to forget about my friend. And if I could just forget about my friend, it would be okay. And then she would say, like, love, not grief. Just think about love. And I had to say love and grief are intertwined. So we had these conversations, and a lot of the chapters are just really short because I felt like I just needed to get it down somewhere. And as I was putting the pieces together, they were all really, I think they were essays to begin with, but pretty early on, I came up with the idea of reaching out to Microcosm and pitching it as a zine, because there's not a lot about parenting during the pandemic out there yet. And I knew a zine would be a lot faster to get in the hands of people who need it. Because a lot of people are grieving and a lot of people are parenting. And you don't have to, you can be doing one or the other and not simultaneously to just hear one perspective and one family getting through the best we can. So I was really honored to get it out into the world.
Are you getting a good response from other parents? It occurred to me that you saw a need for something and created the answer to it, created something to answer that need.
Yeah, it saved me, but I also I hope it saved other people. I got incredible responses after the OPB appearance and when it first came out, and then it just seems to keep getting more attention. So I haven't heard from a lot of people I don't know, but I know people are out there buying it and sitting with it because it keeps selling. It's now in its 3rd printing. So I know it's out there. And I think you used the word charming, and I so appreciated that because I really wanted to connect the joy and the moments of uplift and the moments of humor. I wanted to connect all those pieces with the grief and be able to do it all and share it all, instead of just trying to write I didn't want to write a really sad thing. I mean, it's about a sad subject, but I mean, sort of like you have so many murders and murder suicides and capsizings and drownings. And yet your book is kind of a referendum on life goes on. It continues. So
It does. It definitely does. We were talking about people wanting to talk about their loved ones, and one of the most one of the stories that will stay with me and had stayed with me is when the woman here in Newport threw her son off the bridge, and I saw the headline come across my computer, and I remember it was actually would have been my father's birthday, and I remember saying out loud, "Oh my God!" And usually you would think, call your editor, and I wouldn't call anybody. I wouldn't do anything. And I got a message at late that evening, close to midnight, said, "Hey, call us." And I ignored them. I wouldn't. And then in the morning, I just said, "I'm sorry, I'm busy." It was the first time I just absolutely was not going out into the night, bugging people to talk to me, knocking on doors of people who were in such a profound state of grief. I just couldn't do it. And later, knowing what I knew about how sometimes people do want to talk, I sent a note to his father, Austin's father, Matt, and said, "If you ever want to talk about your son and I can help you, tell the world who he was, I'm here." He wrote right back to me and said, "Yes, I'd like to." And so we met right before Father's Day, and it was his first interview. And we sat down and he told me about his son. I'm sorry, his name was London. And just about what a cool little guy he was. And, the last thing he ever said to him was, "Bye, I love you." He was autistic and he was just learning his words. And at the time, Matt was wearing a hat because his son loved hats. And that was kind of his nod to his son, but so brave. But he wanted people to know that just because a child has a disability, just because someone has something that's different, doesn't mean they don't get to live a full life. And I'll never forget, the story ran on Father's Day, and this was this is kind of me and my path to accepting digital journalism. I got the paper, and I'm like all excited to see Matt's story because I thought it would reach other parents. And there was this little postage stamp picture of him on like B14. I'm like, what? Shouldn't this be like the cover story with like? And of course, by then, it was the on the web and everything, but it's taken me a long time to get used to the idea that the newspaper is not the end all be all, that it might be a really good story and it might still be buried on, B22.
Newspapers and the fate of newspapers is a really big theme in your book too. The uncertainty as journalism changed because the internet kept changing how we were doing things, and we were all adapting in different ways about how to get our news. Do you want to talk about that for a moment before we open up to questions?
The Oregonian was kind of late to the party. I always thought. I was running back and forth to see my friends in Denver, and I remember thinking the Post and the Rocky, which was still around, were so far ahead of us, but I didn't mind because I just resisted going into the old digital thing. I didn't want to do that. And I remember when we finally jumped on board and somebody's like, "Okay, well, send me something to post." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I don't want to send you something to post. I don't even know what is going on yet. And furthermore, I don't want you to ruin the freshness of my story in tomorrow's morning paper. I don't want to post anything." Yeah, we soon got used to that one. Then, of course, I came to realize that, oh my God, post it now. Post it now. I'm breaking it. I've adapted.
I think let's talk. Well, I'll say, okay, there's time for one more question. You and I talked on the phone the other day, and I mentioned the fact that everything you write seems to have a mystery in it. Both Wander, your novel, and Stormbeat have mysteries at their core. And if you want to talk a little bit about if that was a decision or that's just how you chose to write them, I'm curious.
The truth of it is, I came here with the idea I was going to write fiction. That was my dream. I wasn't going to be a journalist anymore. I was going to write fiction. And I studied with some really good teachers, mentors. I've had a mentor since 1993, who's been with me the whole way, Sandra Schofield. And I learned a ton from Tom Jenks and Carol Edgarian. So what I learned was about plot. Well, I'm terrible about plot. I'm not a plot kind of person. I'm a character kind of person. I'm a voice kind of person. But you know, they want you to have plot, and I think that's where the mystery thing evolved for me. It's okay. You got to have plot. What are we going to do here? So let's create this. And but really, when you have that unanswered question, I don't know that I ever thought of it as mystery, maybe in hindsight. But when you have that unanswered question, and you can feed it to your reader, maybe. The Glass Hotel, which I just she's wonderful about doing that, and feeding you just enough to go, well, how the hell did that happen? And so somewhere along the line, I learned that. And by the time I got to Stormbeat, I knew that I couldn't just give everything away. What would be the point of keeping on going? So when there was a continuation, I tried to allude to it, particularly in that one cold case situation. It just kept, you know, you'd think, okay, I did the story, and then all of a sudden I'm in Fred Meyer's parking lot, and it's the DA, and another story, and it just kind of had its life of its own. And that's just naturally lends itself to storytelling, is you don't just give it all away right now. And that is why I hated Nutgrass. They drove me nuts, because it's like, why do you give the whole story away up here in chapter in the second graph and think people are going to read to the end? That's like the antithesis of good storytelling. But, you know, it was a newsroom. We weren't supposed to be storytelling so much as just relating the facts.
For those of you who haven't read the book yet, she does a great job as cases run on and different information comes out over the years. She plays that out in a really satisfying way. Instead of telling you, well, 5 years later, blah, 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 she adds the reveals later. And so it adds to the velocity of the book, and it adds to that sense of mystery in a really nice way. So on that note, does anybody have any questions? And Michael, do you want to jump in and tell people how to ask?
People are welcome to ask however they like. If people are shy about getting on the screen, they're welcome to type it up in the chat, and I can read those or if it's just for Lori, you can read them however you like. Feel free to chime in if you like. Ask away.
Michael, I'll let you read them.
Okay, sounds good.
And we have one now from Stephanie Schilling.
Yes, I'm curious if you have visited other coastal towns in other states and how Oregon differs from other states community-wise, townspeople-wise. Thank you, really enjoying this.
Thank you. So I'm assuming you're talking about coastal communities.
Yeah, coastal towns in other states and how Oregon differs from those.
I grew up in Pennsylvania, and the first travels to go anywhere is the Jersey Shore. Yeah, Jersey's kind of a different vibe from Oregon, as you might have gathered. And then I lived in Connecticut, and the cool thing about living in those places is, 2 hours later, you're in Boston, or you're at Martha's Vineyard, or you're on the coast in Connecticut. So one of the biggest differences is people think it's nuts. It's unheard of that our beaches are open. They're public. You can't own them. That's amazing. I'll never forget taking my husband back. We went to Ocean City, Maryland, and we're hanging out on the boardwalk. He's from Alaska, so I'm trying to explain to him how like the Jersey Shore works, or the Maryland Shore. It's all the Jersey Shore, really. And next thing you know, they come in with these. It's early in the morning, and they come in with these like graders and tractors, and they go out to the beach and they grade the beach. And I forgot they did that, frankly. But my husband's going like, "What are they doing?" Like, they grade the beach, they make it nice and neat and flat, and there's little grooves in it, just like he went out and mowed the lawn, and all the trash is picked up, and it's kind of funny. And then the water, it's like a bathtub back there. It's nothing like out here. It's not deadly like out here. It's generally, as I'm recalling, flat. We used to camp a little bit in Northern Cal on the coast there, and I remember having bear things to put your food in so the bears wouldn't get it. I don't think we deal with that here. The Oregon coast, people are friendly here. It's still a small town. I think one of the reasons I wanted to settle on the Oregon coast, even way back before it was an option, is I thought, there are not many places left where a working class family can own a house, if not on the beach, if not with a view, just a couple blocks, you can have a coastal home and still be like a working class family. I don't think there's many places left like that. And even though it's changed here dramatically, it's still within the dream, I think. I remember going to Rhode Island for the first time and seeing these houses on stilts and thinking, they're these ramshackle little houses on stilts, and thinking, oh my God, like what, 75,000? Oh, hell, they're like $1.5 million and it can't be 300 square feet. Like, what? So yeah, I was pretty, I hope that answered your question. There's no place like the Oregon coast.
All right. I have a question from my lovely wife, Liz Prado. Lori, did you set out knowing there was a link/metaphor between the death of newspapers and the human deaths you were constantly covering? Or did that organically emerge as you were putting the book together?
Oh, Liz, you give me way too much credit. Until you asked me that question, I didn't put them together. It just, I didn't. The breaking news stories were such a fact of my life. And I've talked about this before. The phone rings or whatever happens and you just run out the door. And I didn't know this for a long time. I finally figured it out. Your camera, your notebook, the interviews, your deadline, act as a filter from the horrible thing that's going on in front of you. So you just have to get it done. You have to make your deadline. You have to write your story. You have to get your quotes. You sometimes have to get your photos because they don't send a photographer. So you don't have time to really stand there and mourn or think about it too much. And then at the end of the day, the deadline's met. Your editor calls and says, okay, we're good. It's the end of the day. Might be 8 or 9 o'clock at night. And that is when it, like a couple hours after that, it would hit me. And I would suddenly go, my poor husband, we're sitting there watching a nice, funny TV show. Everybody's laughing, happy. And all of a sudden I'm like, I can't believe what, and he's like, oh God, here we go. But in terms of juxtaposing that with the death of the news business, geez, Liz, I didn't get there. And I guess I resisted that even after I got laid off, I think I resisted. I think I remember them doing some reorganization in the newsroom and me saying to one of my colleagues, oh, maybe they'll bring us back. And he kind of going, Lori, knock it off, get over it. It's not the business you knew it was. It's a different world. So just get over it. That was when I finally went, whoa, I guess I am living in dreamland. So I really resisted the idea of what's happening to the news business for a long time.
All right. From the delightful Debbie Dodds, we have a different kind of question. What was the funniest story you ever covered?
Well, I don't know if it was the funniest story, but so I used to go to the aquarium whenever they get new vultures in, or they get a new sea lion, or they get a new sea otter, whatever. I would run down there. It was great for me. First of all, that's in my backyard. Second, it was a break. And so they went through this period where they had sea lions painting with their flippers. So they would take paint and they put it on their flippers. It was like an enrichment activity. And they would sell these paintings in the gift shop. People loved them. And so I'm there to record the sea lions painting. And they reward them with like 5,000,006 sardines or herrings or whatever. It goes on forever. And finally they said, the sea lion's name was Leah. Would you like a Leah kiss? And I'm like, now, when you're a reporter, you do what's happening. I mean, I once drank a, never mind. I can't think of it now. Octopus martini, because that's what they were doing at the place. So at the aquarium, they said, do you want a Leah kiss? Well, of course I want a Leah kiss. I'm here to write about it. So Leah comes up and she sticks her lips up against mine and we hold it for a minute. And all of a sudden, Leah belches through her nose into my face like 1,000,000 fish burps in my face. I'm telling you, I can smell that burp to this day.
I bet. Laura was holding up the picture of the nicer part of that event from the book. That must be the moment before the fish burp. Oh boy.
Either I was that or I was having a really good poker face that day. But yeah, it was
Yeah.
pungent to say the least.
Well, that worked as a funny story. Debbie was cracking up. Thumbs up.
I do have one story that's not funny, but
Yeah.
it didn't make the book. And I mean, it's funny in a not ha-ha kind of way, but I'm here, so I guess it's funny. So this guy wanted me to come to his house and write about this collection he had. And it's a pretty cool collection. And I go to his house and we go in the kitchen. Now you gotta remember, I never told anybody where I was gonna be. I mean, I was always off just running, and I'd check in with my husband, hi, I'm still alive. I might be home tonight, I might not. So we sit at his kitchen table and he shows me his collection. And then he says, oh, come back here. And we go one room deeper in the house and we're back there. And then he says, then he's going to the cupboards and he's showing me something he can't find. And then he says, oh, but come back here. And I'm kind of going, okay, I'm not liking this. So we go one room deeper in the house. And then he goes, oh, wait, come on, let's go down to the basement. I swear to you, by then I was pretty much certain I was about to be the next victim of an axe murder. I was absolutely frantic. I pick up my phone. I literally faked a conversation with my editor. And I swear to you, I all but ran out of that house. And to this day, if I got a news thing that, they dug up his house and found all these bodies in the foundation, I would not be surprised. I was absolutely convinced this guy was trying to murder me. I know, not funny, but hey, like I said, here I am.
No, it's good. I was just reminded of Silence of the Lambs or something. I was expecting to be thrown down a well.
Yeah, I wasn't going in that basement though, I can tell you that much. I do want to say something, and I hope this isn't out of line, but this is pretty important to me. For my whole time with the Oregonian, I worked with Todd Anderson, sheriff of Tillamook County, and I would call and say, hey, Todd, it's me. And Todd knew exactly who it was. And this wasn't smartphone time. This could be landline, anything. But I used to joke that, it's a good thing my husband trusted me because Todd and I were tight. We would joke about one time, Todd, I said, hey, Todd, I'm going to Vegas this weekend. And Todd's like, wait, I'm going to Vegas this weekend. And it's like, the sheriff of Tillamook County does not need the reporter with the largest daily newspaper in Oregon in Vegas when he's in Vegas. We had a good laugh about it. He was retiring and I went up to his office and he's like, hey, do you want to go out and blow up a car? Yeah, okay. So I went out in the woods with him and the FBI and CIA and I don't know who all, but there were about 20 men and me. It was like a forest of testosterone and me. And they told me what I needed to do. And they showed me the car that's going to be blown up. And then we all went to this other place and they gave me the detonator and they told me I had to yell, fire in the hole, fire in the hole, fire in the hole, which I wouldn't do. I made the other guy yell it. And then I hit the detonator and I blew up the car. In any case, I signed on to Facebook right after Christmas and learned that Todd died. So this is my way of saying, he made my job so much easier and he made me look good. And you don't really find that many sources in this business who will come through for you like that, every day. And he had his ground rules, and as long as you played by his rules, and that's, he was the guy who would call you at 5 a.m. and say, hey, there's a capsizing, and he understood my job and he understood how to make my life easier. And I understood how to make his life a little easier when I could.
Oh, that's nice. Glad you shared that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Debbie had a little follow-up question, and I was wondering this too. What was the mysterious collection that this guy was showing you in his house?
I'm going to be a little vague about it just because I don't want to, but it's such a weird thing. But he collected stamps, but a little more refined than that. I mean, these things were worth some money. Yeah. And the thing of it is the reason he wanted me to do the story is the IRS was after him. So he was going to do this thing where he was putting him in his wife's name, and he wanted me to be like the one who's putting that on the record, which my editor, thank God, was a lot smarter than I was. And she's like, Lori, he's using you to establish a paper trail or whatever so that these stamps actually belong to his wife. And you need to not play into that. And I have no idea if he's still around, but yeah. I want to point out that Debbie Dodds and I are from the same claustrophobic, conservative, inbred section of Pennsylvania. Oh, right, it's not inbred. I'm sorry. It's we're both from Pennsylvania Dutch country, but Debbie's from real Pennsylvania Dutch country. I'm from an adjoining county that's only kind of Pennsylvania Dutch country.
This is the author, Debbie Dodds, who has a YA book about dating an Amish boy. Tell us the name of it again, Debbie. I forgot. Amish Guys Don't Call. Is that? She's got it. There it is. Yep. All right. Well, do we have any final questions for our wonderful authors tonight? So I wanted to paste this link into the chat room again before I let you guys go. This is the event page on Annie Bloom's. You can buy both of the authors' books there. We really appreciate the support. So head on over there, pick up Lori's book, pick up Laura's book. They're great books. Treat yourself, treat others. They make great gifts.
Thank you, everyone. Lisa, Yvonne, Centila, I see you, Ken. Thank you, everybody. These are fun for me. I was saying when we started, when I did Wander, I actually got to read in New York City, which is supposed to be like this big dream, right? But I was a nervous wreck. As my niece said, I was a hot mess. But virtual events, I could do this all night. This, you know.
Nice, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. It's that silver lining.
Debbie asked how to get a signed book.
Ah, yes.
Well, if you come to the coast, let me know and we'll get together. And the other option is I can stick a label in the mail to you.
There you go. Let Lori know. Or you can also email me at books@annieblooms.com and let me know, and I can try to coordinate something too with either of these authors or both.
Thank you. That'd
Yeah,
be great.
of course. Very happy to do that. All right, thank you
so
everyone
much,
so much.
Thank you, Michael, for being an exceptional host as always, and to all of you for coming.
Laura. All right, everyone, have a great night, and we will hopefully see you at another event soon.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.